This Typewriter Broke is going to look at an Erika 10 in Cyrillic. And so we have this Russian theme, and we'll look at some Russian poets, Anna Akhmatova and Joseph Brodsky, two giants of poetry world in Russia in the 20th century. Brodsky was mentored by Anna Akhmatova. And the video is a video of the boats outside my window, scooting around about 8 times as fast as normal. Doesn't have a whole lot to do with Russian, but it suited the music as they tour around looking at the big ship on the big lake. Here's the Erika with Cyrillic type. They're a bit interesting. This little thing here. Do that. And I'm going to take it off because I have to clean it. By take it off, I mean take it off the base. And those orange clips have to be removed, and 2 bolts on the bottom had to be removed, which gets me to this point. The case off, which is really going to be hard to get back on because you have to kind of angle it in, and it's not fun. It would be easier if I took the carriage off, but I'm not inclined to take the carriage off because that can be, unless it's designed to be popped off really easily, it's not. Those are hard to wrangle back on again and make them work right. So I did this so that I could get all of the keys working. And they basically do, except for this. Well, now it does. Oh, it does because I've got this out because I'm going to polish this up. But this key isn't angled right, and it gets caught in there. But otherwise, everything's working pretty well. I tested the return on the ribbon to make sure that, and this is a really goofy mechanism. If I can get you in there. So it's this little tiny thing that hits, and then when this, oops, the other one is hit, this comes out and prevents this from going. But this was a little stiff, and so sometimes it wouldn't actually engage. And then the same thing on the other side. While you've got it torn apart, you should make sure that these things are rotating properly and switching directions and things like that. And then I'm going to clean up the type slugs. I haven't really looked at how good they are or bad they are, but typically they're cookie and easier to do without damaging paint. And there's my pile of somewhat organized mayhem. Mostly it's important to remember the order you take things apart. so that you can put them back together. If you put something back on and you forget to put a part in that needs to have that other one out of the way, then it gets to be a real tragedy. Well, a headache anyway. So I'm going to do these, clean this little guy up and polish up what I can here, and then try and put it back together. So let's start with Anna Akhmatova. She was probably the greatest female poet in the 20th century, and lived through the Stalinist period and took the worst of the abuses of the Soviet system and wrote about it. We start with her poem Requiem, and we'll just do the preface of it. It's slightly, the story goes that she was waiting in line day after day at the prison to visit her son, possibly give him some provisions. And one day they called her name, and a woman behind her recognized the name and cried because of what they had lost. She had been a great poet, writing love poems, and now standing in this dismal line. And so I present here just the preface. I think it's supposed to be not quite a preface, but the beginning of the poem, where she sets the scene, and in a Russian way changes things up a little bit. It starts, during the frightening years of the Yezhov terror, I spent 17 months waiting in prison queues in Leningrad. One day, somehow, someone picked me out. On that occasion, there was a woman standing behind me, her lips blue with cold, who, of course, had never in her life heard my name. Jolted out of the torpor characteristic of all of us, she said into my ear, everyone whispered there, "Could one ever describe this?" And I answered, "I can." It was then that something like a smile slid across what had previously been just a face. That sentiment is probably what motivates all poets. And here's another poem called Willow. And I grew up in patterned tranquility in the cool nursery of the young century, and the voice of man was not dear to me, but the voice of the wind I could understand. But best of all, the silver willow. And obligingly it lived with me all my life. Its weeping branches fanned my insomnia with dreams, and strange, I outlived it. There the stump stands with strange voices. Other willows are conversing under those skies. And I am silent, as if a brother had died. So here's the bright and shiny Erika. Got it all polished up and fixed, and here's the typing sample. I spelled Brodsky wrong there. That says, at the Brodsky, it should have two S's here. Sorry about that. And I didn't know typewriter, so I just had a little fun with the different letters and said typewriter. But it's actually a complicated word in Russian. It's something or other machina, so it's Russkaya machina. But neither here nor there, because I don't think any of you guys out there know Russian particularly. And doing a type test is a little bit weird because I am not good enough at Russian. Probably was, well, I used to type in Russian pretty well, but not anymore. I can't even spell Ruski right, so, but I can do, the quick brown fox jumped over the lazy dog as if this was that, so that sounds like a good idea. It's a pretty big typeface, actually. Which is interesting. It must have been used for like educational purposes, maybe. You know, worksheets where you would make up words of work, Russian words and whatnot. The touch on this is a little bit tough. Oh, that's not looking so good. The uppercase is definitely not looking so good. There's a leftover spring, and I think it has something to do with this mechanism, the locking mechanism. I think that. So let's try. Now I can't help and pack. Yeah, that works better. So it's really the hold adjustment here that wasn't working. I don't know where the J is. Over, I think over. I'm losing my English now. Wow. It does. Where are you? It actually does work. It just, you need to hold the shift key manually. So, pretty good type. Cleaned up very nicely. What do I plan to do with this one? I don't know, anybody want to buy it? Really? Anybody want to buy any of the ones that I've had in these videos? I think I could sell all of them. And we finish with Joseph Brodsky, who was mentored by Anna Akhmatova in Leningrad. At the time it was Leningrad. And here's a bit about the times. The second kind of banned books were those that had never been published in the USSR at all. Authors like Voinovich and Zamyatin were branded anti-Soviet from the get-go, as was the Bohemian parasite poet Joseph Brodsky. In fact, any Russian writers and philosophers who criticized the USSR or communism in any way were right out. Although banned books could not be printed or distributed through legal channels, they were nonetheless widely read within intelligentsia circles, thanks to samizdat, or self-publishing. This meant borrowing a banned book from a friend, retyping it at home on a typewriter through carbon paper, and distributing the resulting copies to trusted friends for recopying and further dissemination. People produced and acquired samizdat books as much to make a private statement of dissent as to read. Here and there, usually at house parties, one heard mysterious half-whispers such as the famous innuendo, "Erika takes 4." Erika was a reliable brand of East German typewriter that could yield up to 4 legible carbon copies. Typewriters were the main copying method for samizdat, but they were not the only way. At scientific institutes and in research centers, people would reproduce books on huge, clunky computers with continuous feed paper. In the end, the book would come out on one long sheet with perforated edges and could then be rolled into a scroll. I chose a poem, 7 Strophes, by Joseph Brodsky. It's one of my favorites. It was dedicated to Marina Basmanova, who I guess some consider Brodsky's muse, great love. She was the mother of his son Andrei. He ended up being exiled after a trial in the Soviet Union, and he left. Unlike Akhmatova, who had many opportunities to leave, from the Revolution, First World War, Second World War, but she firmly was planted in Russia. And Brodsky, I think, was a bit damaged by having to leave. I think any Russophile is damaged by having to leave. So 7 Strophes. I was but what you'd brush with your palm, what your leaning brow would hunch to in evening's raven black hush. I was but what your gaze in that dark could distinguish, a dim shape to begin with, later features a face. It was you on my right, on my left, with your heated sighs, who molded my helix, whispering at my side. It was you by that black window's trembling tulle pattern, who laid in my raw cavern a voice calling you back. I was practically blind. You appearing, then hiding, gave me my sight and heightened it. Thus some leave behind a trace. Thus they make worlds. Thus, having done so, at random, wastefully, they abandon their work to its whirls. Thus, prey to speeds of light, heat, cold, or darkness, a sphere in space without markers spins and spins.